Picture this. It is the dead of night. You are hauling 40,000 pounds of steel and cargo down a pitch black, isolated highway. The only light for miles is the cone of your high beam slicing through the thick, suffocating fog. The only sound is the steady, hypnotic rumble of your diesel engine and the low static of your CB radio. For most of us out on the road, that radio is a lifeline. It is a connection to the world of the living when we are miles away from civilization. But what happens when that lifeline gets hijacked? What happens when the voice crackling through the speaker isn't human at all, but a phantom reaching out from the dark, trying to pull you straight into a watery grave? Welcome back to Channel 19 Mysteries. I'm your host, Midnight Rider. Tonight, we are traveling back to November 14th, 1994, venturing deep into the suffocating darkness of the Florida swamps to uncover one of the most chilling, documented anomalies in the history of commercial hauling. But before we ride into the dark, I want to remind you, if you want to listen to these stories while hauling that heavy load, you can download the YouTube Music app and listen to the podcast by searching for Channel 19 Mysteries. Also, please help keep the headlights on by hitting that like button, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment down below to let me know what you think of tonight's terrifying tale. Now, let's get into tonight's story. He followed the CB's instructions. If you were to pull out a map of South Florida and look at the vast green expanse stretching between the eastern coastal cities and the western Gulf shores, you would see a whole lot of nothing. This is the Florida Everglades. It is a massive, slow-moving river of grass spanning thousands of square miles of murky water, dense cypress domes, and razor-sharp sawgrass. For tourists, it is an ecological marvel. But for the long-haul truckers who have to navigate the few lonely stretches of asphalt cutting through this swamp in the dead of night, it is an incredibly isolating and unnerving place. There are only a few ways to get a massive 18-wheeler across the southern tip of the state. You have Interstate 75, famously known as Alligator Alley, and you have Highway 27, a desolate, straight shot of road that cuts through some of the most remote agricultural and swampland in the country. Out there, the cell phone towers are sparse even today. But back in the early 90s, long before GPS navigation was standard in every cab, drivers relied entirely on physical maps, their own intuition, and the crackling lifeline of their CB radios. The CB radio is the beating heart of the trucking community. It is how drivers warn each other about speed traps, bad weather, and accidents. Most of the chatter happens on Channel 19. It is usually a chaotic mix of static, friendly banter, and lot lizards advertising their services at the next rest stop. But every so often, a driver will scan past the standard channels and hit a pocket of dead air, a frequency where nothing is supposed to broadcast. And according to the logs recovered in the winter of 1994, there is a very specific dead frequency out in the Everglades that should not exist. A frequency that has been hijacking the radios of veteran haulers, speaking to them in a calm, authoritative voice and luring them off the pavement, straight into the deep water of the sawgrass. This is the story of William MacIntyre, a veteran driver who heard that voice, and the chilling forensic dissection of his 1994 trucking logs that proved he was communicating with something or someone that could not possibly have been there. William MacIntyre, known to everyone at the Miami Logistics Yard simply as Bill, was not a man who got spooked easily. By the time November of 1994 rolled around, Bill was 52 years old and had spent 25 of those years behind the wheel of a heavy-duty commercial truck. He was a creature of habit. He drove a pristine, cherry red 1989 Peterbilt 379, a massive conventional cab truck that he maintained with the meticulous care of a museum curator. Bill had logged over 2 million safe driving miles. He did not drink, he did not take pills to stay awake, and he certainly did not believe in ghost stories. He was a man of mechanics, physics, and asphalt. On the evening of November 14th, 1994, Bill was assigned a highly sensitive route. He was working for a specialized freight company called Apex Chemical Transport, based out of the Port of Miami. Apex handled the kind of cargo that most standard carriers refused to touch. On this particular Monday, Bill was hauling a sealed, pressurized tanker filled with 42,500 pounds of highly volatile industrial solvent. The chemical was being transported to a specialized manufacturing plant on the outskirts of Tampa. Because of the hazardous nature of the cargo, the loading process was intensely strict. The trailer was sealed with a heavy-duty metal tamper tag. The exact serial number of that tag, Alpha 7942, was recorded by the Port Authority, logged by the warehouse foreman, and written down on a physical carbon copy manifest that Bill kept secured on a clipboard in his passenger seat. The contents of the trailer, the specific weight, and the routing information were classified. Only 3 people in the world knew the exact details of Bill's haul that night: the foreman in Miami, the receiving manager in Tampa, and Sarah Higgins, the night shift dispatcher working the desk at Apex Chemical Transport's headquarters. It is crucial to understand this level of secrecy. In 1994, there were no digital tracking portals that a hacker could access. There was no public database. The information was written on paper, locked in a filing cabinet, and stored in Bill's cab. At exactly 6:45 p.m. on November 14th, 1994, Bill pulled his Peterbilt out of the port. The weather was already turning foul. A massive low-pressure system was sweeping in from the Atlantic, bringing with it the kind of torrential, blinding rain that Florida is famous for. The sky turned the color of bruised iron, and the rain began falling in heavy, gray sheets, bouncing off the hot pavement. Bill's planned route was straightforward. He was to take the local highways west out of the Miami metro area, jump onto Highway 27, and take it straight north and west through the heart of the Everglades up toward the Tampa region. It was a long, lonely drive, but Bill actually preferred the night shifts. Less traffic meant fewer four-wheelers cutting him off. By 8:30 p.m., Bill had left the glow of the Miami city lights far behind him. As he transitioned onto the desolate stretch of Highway 27, the environment immediately swallowed him. Out here, there are no streetlights. There are no gas stations for miles. The only illumination comes from the headlights of the truck cutting through the driving rain, illuminating the thick walls of dense vegetation and dark water that run parallel to the highway on both sides. The rain was coming down so hard that Bill's heavy-duty windshield wipers were struggling to keep up. The massive Peterbilt's tires hissed loudly against the wet asphalt. Inside the cab, it was warm and comfortable. The dashboard glowed with the soft green light of his gauges. Bill had his CB radio turned on, tuned to channel 19, hoping to catch some weather updates from any other drivers braving the storm. For the first hour on Highway 27, the radio was mostly quiet, save for the occasional burst of localized static caused by the lightning strikes in the distance. Bill kept his speed steady, his eyes locked on the white lines painted on the road, watching them blur past in the hypnotic rhythm of night driving. Then, at exactly 9:42 p.m., the atmosphere inside the cab shifted. It started with a subtle change in the radio. The low, white noise hum of Channel 19 suddenly completely dropped out. It was replaced by a heavy, profound silence. It was not just quiet. It was the specific, pressurized silence of a dead frequency, as if the radio had completely disconnected from the antenna. Bill frowned, reaching over to adjust the squelch dial, thinking the storm had knocked out his reception. He tapped the side of the radio housing. Before his fingers could leave the dial, a burst of heavy, rhythmic static exploded from the speaker, making Bill jump in his seat. It sounded like an ocean wave crashing, followed by a sharp, electronic whine. Then, a voice cut through the static. It was a male voice. It was incredibly clear, cutting through the background noise with perfect fidelity. The voice was smooth, completely devoid of any regional accent, and possessed an unnervingly calm, almost lethargic cadence. "Apex Unit 41, the voice said slowly. "This is Base Station Charlie. Come back, Unit 41. Bill blinked in surprise. Unit 41 was his company designation, but he did not recognize the voice, and he certainly did not recognize the call sign, Base Station Charlie. The only dispatcher on duty tonight was Sarah Higgins, and her call sign was always simply Apex Base. Thinking Sarah might have handed the desk over to a night supervisor, Bill grabbed the microphone hanging from his dashboard, depressed the transmit button, and brought it to his mouth. "Base, this is Unit 4-1. I read you loud and clear. Who am I speaking with? Is Sarah off the desk?" There was a pause. The static crackled softly. Then the voice returned, maintaining that same flat, emotionless tone. "Sarah is unavailable, William. This is Base Station Charlie. I am taking over your routing for the evening." A chill ran down Bill's spine, though he could not immediately articulate why. It was not just the fact that the dispatcher had used his first name, which was rare, as they usually stuck to unit numbers. It was the way he said it. William. Nobody called him William. Everyone called him Bill. "All right, Charlie," Bill said, trying to shake off the unease. "What's the word?" "The weather out here on 27 is getting real nasty. Visibility is down to about 50 yards. "Copy that, William," the voice replied. "That is precisely why I am contacting you. We have a major situation ahead of you at mile marker 48. A severe multi-vehicle collision involving a chemical fire. Highway 27 is completely shut down in both directions. The Florida Highway Patrol has established a hard barricade." Bill eased off the accelerator, letting the massive truck begin to decelerate. A full highway shutdown out in the Everglades was a nightmare scenario. There were nowhere near enough shoulders to turn around a 70-foot tractor trailer. If he got caught in the backlog, he could be sitting idle in the swamp for 10 hours. "Copy that, Base," Bill replied, feeling a surge of anxiety. "What's the alternate?" "I'm hauling volatile solvent here. I can't just sit parked in the middle of nowhere if there's a fire hazard up ahead." The radio went silent for almost 20 seconds. Bill waited, listening to the relentless drumming of the rain against his roof. Finally, the smooth voice returned. "I have your alternate route mapped, William. It is an old logging bypass that was recently repaved for heavy industrial use. It will take you around the accident site and deposit you safely back onto the main highway, 12 miles north." "A bypass?" Bill asked, staring out the rain-slicked windshield. "I've been driving this stretch for 2 decades, Charlie. I don't know of any paved bypass out here. It's all sawgrass and federal protected land. The access is authorized for your specific cargo," the voice insisted. And this is where the conversation took a turn that defied all logic. "You are hauling 42,500 pounds of volatile solvent. Your trailer seal is Alpha 7942. Because of your specific manifest, emergency access to the old state service road has been granted. You will look for an unmarked dirt turnaround exactly 2.4 miles from your current location on your left-hand side. You will cross the median and take the access road west into the interior." Bill felt his breath catch in his throat. He looked over at the clipboard sitting on his passenger seat. The manifest was lying face down. The cab was pitch black. Yet, this voice over the radio had just recited his exact cargo weight, down to the pound, and had read off the random alphanumeric security seal tag perfectly. That information was impossible for anyone to know unless they were looking at the master file back in Miami. This convinced Bill that whoever was on the other end of the radio had to be an official Apex Company dispatcher. "Copy that, Charlie," Bill said, though his hand was gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. 2.4 miles, left-hand median crossover." "Affirmative, William. I will guide you through the interchange. Maintain your current speed." Bill drove in silence for the next 3 minutes, watching his odometer roll over. The rain was coming down in blinding diagonal sheets. He flipped his high beams on, illuminating the heavy wall of rainfall and the deep, impenetrable blackness of the swamp lining the highway. Exactly 2.4 miles later, a break in the trees appeared on his left. It was incredibly difficult to see, hidden behind a thick growth of cypress. But sure enough, there was a break in the grassy median, leading to a narrow, unpaved service road that disappeared off into the western swamp. Bill downshifted, the heavy engine roaring as the exhaust brake engaged. He checked his mirrors, nothing but darkness behind him, and slowly swung the massive rig across the median, his heavy tires crunching over the wet grass and gravel. He turned left, pointing the nose of the Peterbilt away from the highway and straight into the dense, overgrown interior of the Everglades. The moment the rear tires of his trailer left the asphalt of Highway 27, the atmosphere changed again. The road beneath him was not paved, despite what the dispatcher had claimed. It was packed dirt and crushed limestone, already turning into thick, slippery mud from the torrential rain. The trees immediately closed in on both sides, their low-hanging branches scraping violently against the top of Bill's trailer with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. Bill immediately felt a profound sense of wrongness. "Base, this is 4-1, Bill said into the radio, keeping his speed down to a crawl. The truck was bucking and sliding in the mud. This road is not paved. I repeat, this is an unimproved dirt path. My rig is too heavy for this. If I hit a soft patch, I'm going to sink an axle and get stuck." Static hissed through the cabin. Then, the calm voice returned. "Negative, William. The road foundation is reinforced limestone. It is structurally sound. You must continue driving. Do not stop. If you stop, you will lose momentum and sink. Keep driving west." Bill swallowed hard. The darkness outside the cab was absolute. The headlights only penetrated about 20 feet into the driving rain before reflecting off a solid wall of dense, terrifyingly thick sawgrass. He was moving at maybe 10 miles an hour, his tires spinning and fighting for grip in the muck. He drove for another 10 minutes. The path was getting narrower. He could see dark, black water pooling on either side of the dirt path, creeping up toward the edges of the road. The Everglades was essentially a giant, shallow river, and during a storm, the water levels rose rapidly. Bill realized with a sickening twist in his stomach that the road he was on was barely elevated above the waterline. If he slipped a few feet to the left or right, his 42,000-pound trailer would roll over into the marsh, dragging the cab down with it. "Charlie, this is completely unsafe," Bill practically shouted into the microphone. "I need to put this rig in reverse and back out to the highway. This is a dead end. Do not stop, William," the voice replied instantly, cutting him off. The voice was no longer just calm. It sounded entirely devoid of humanity. It lacked the natural cadence of a person breathing. "You are approaching the interchange. It is just a little further ahead. Drive into the dark, William. We are waiting for you at the interchange." Bill's heart hammered against his ribs. "We are waiting for you." The phrasing was all wrong. Desperate, Bill reached down and began aggressively twisting the channel dial on his CB radio. He spun it away from the dead frequency, desperately trying to find channel 19, channel 9, anything with human life. He spun the dial back and forth, but every single channel was broadcasting the exact same heavy, rhythmic, static. Then, a miracle happened. For a brief 3-second window, the static broke, and a familiar, frantic voice cut through the noise. "Unit 4-1! Bill, do you read me? Bill, come back!" It was Sarah Higgins, the real dispatcher, back in Miami. Bill slammed his thumb onto the transmit button. Sarah, I'm here. I'm stuck on some dirt access road off 27. Where's the accident?" "Tell Charlie I can't make this route." There was a burst of static, and then Sarah's voice came back, sounding panicked and confused. "Bill, what are you talking about? There is no Charlie. I'm the only one in the office, and there's no accident on Highway 27. The road is completely clear." "Where did you go? Your GPS beacon stopped transmitting 20 minutes ago." The blood drained completely from Bill MacIntyre's face. There was no accident. There was no dispatcher named Charlie. Before Bill could ask another question, the radio violently clicked. Sarah's voice was severed, completely cut off. The heavy, pressurized silence returned to the cab. Then, the smooth, emotionless voice of the ghost dispatcher filled the cabin one last time. "Why did you stop, William? The interchange is right here. Drive forward. Drive into the water." Bill slammed both feet onto the air brakes. The massive Peterbilt groaned, the tires locking up and sliding forward in the slick mud. The truck lurched violently, the cab tilting dangerously to the left, before finally coming to a dead stop. Bill sat frozen, his chest heaving, his hands gripping the steering wheel. The silence inside the cab was deafening, broken only by the sound of the rain hammering against the glass. Slowly, terrifyingly, Bill leaned forward and peered out the windshield into the beam of his headlights. Less than 10 feet in front of the nose of his truck, the dirt path simply ended. It vanished completely into a deep, black, stagnant canal of swamp water. If he had continued driving for another 5 seconds, The massive weight of the rig would have carried him straight over the edge, plunging him headfirst into a watery grave from which he would never have escaped. But that was not the most terrifying part. As Bill stared into the illuminated rain just beyond the edge of the path, his headlights reflected off something metallic, half submerged in the thick muck and sawgrass. It was massive, rusted, and covered in years of green algae and creeping vines. It was the skeletal, decaying frame of an 18-wheeler tractor. Bill recognized the distinct, blocky shape of the cab. It was an old 1978 Kenworth. As his eyes adjusted, he saw the faded, peeling paint on the side of the door. The logo was barely visible, but he could make out the name of a defunct logistics company from decades ago. Suddenly, a memory slammed into Bill's mind. A piece of trucking lore he had heard at a diner years ago. Back in 1981, a veteran driver named Paul Evans had been hauling a massive load of construction equipment down Highway 27 during a severe tropical storm. He had radioed in to say he was taking a detour to avoid a washout. Paul Evans, his rig, and his cargo were never seen again. They simply vanished into the massive expanse of the Everglades, swallowed by the swamp. Bill was looking at Paul Evans' truck. A sudden, aggressive burst of static erupted from the CB radio, so loud it made Bill physically recoil. The voice did not speak words this time. It was a distorted, garbled sound, a horrible, mechanical screeching noise that sounded like metal tearing underwater, mixed with what sounded like the frantic, panicked breathing of a man drowning. Bill didn't hesitate. He grabbed the gear shift, threw the massive transmission into reverse, and slammed his foot on the accelerator. The Peterbilt roared in protest. The rear tires spun wildly in the mud, throwing massive rooster tails of black dirt into the air. For a terrifying second, the truck refused to move, the heavy trailer threatening to drag them sideways into the water. But Bill MacIntyre was a master driver. He expertly feathered the clutch, locking the differentials, forcing the giant machine to find traction. Slowly, agonizingly, the truck began to inch backward. Bill drove the rig in reverse for over 2 miles, blindly backing out down the narrow, overgrown path in the pouring rain, using only his mirrors and sheer terror to keep the truck on the dirt. When the rear tires finally hit the solid, paved asphalt of Highway 27, Bill whipped the cab around, shifted into high gear, and did not stop driving until he reached a brightly lit, heavily populated truck stop on the outskirts of Fort Lauderdale. He parked the rig under a floodlight, locked the doors, and sat in the cab shaking until the sun came up. The story of William MacIntyre could have easily been written off as the hallucination of an exhausted, stressed out driver fighting a terrible storm. Highway hypnosis is a very real phenomenon, and the mind can play terrible tricks on a person staring into the dark for too long. However, the subsequent investigation conducted by Apex Chemical Transport and a private investigator named Detective Robert Langford turned this incident from a spooky trucker tale into one of the most chilling, documented anomalies in the history of commercial hauling. The morning after the incident, on November 15th, 1994, Bill formally refused to finish the route and demanded an investigation into the radio hijacking. Detective Langford, a former state trooper hired by the logistics company, began a forensic dissection of the events of that night. The first thing Langford examined was the company's internal recording system. Apex Chemical Transport, due to the hazardous nature of their cargo, recorded all incoming and outgoing radio transmissions from their base station in Miami. Langford sat in the office with Sarah Higgins and played back the tapes from the night of November 14th. On the tapes, they heard Sarah desperately trying to hail Bill's truck at exactly 10:15 p.m. Right when his GPS beacon, a rudimentary early 90s tracking system, suddenly vanished off their monitors. They heard Sarah's panicked voice. But what terrified the investigators was what they heard immediately following Sarah's transmission. The base station tape had recorded the ghost dispatcher. Through the heavy static on the recording, Langford and Sarah clearly heard the smooth, emotionless voice say, "Drive into the dark, William. We are waiting for you at the interchange." This proved definitively that the voice was not in Bill's head. It was a real, physical radio transmission that had powerful enough wattage to reach both Bill's truck deep in the swamp and the base station receiver back in Miami. Detective Langford then requested the physical paper logs and the radio telemetry data from the local Federal Communications Commission branch. He wanted to triangulate the exact origin point of the broadcast. In 1994, it was entirely possible for a malicious actor with a powerful ham radio setup to hijack CB frequencies and mess with drivers. Langford assumed they were dealing with a deranged local who got off on causing accidents. But when the data came back, the reality was far more disturbing. The forensic dissection of the radio logs revealed three impossible facts. First, the frequency that the voice was transmitting on was measured at exactly 39.0 megahertz. In the United States, that specific frequency band had been entirely decommissioned by the military in 1972. It was a literal dead zone. Commercially available CB radios in 1994 physically lacked the crystals required to even tune into that frequency, let alone receive perfectly clear audio from it. Yet, Bill's radio had been forcibly shifted to it. Second, the logs proved that the voice knew the exact weight of the cargo and the alphanumeric seal tag. Detective Langford audited every single employee at Apex Chemical. He proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that nobody outside of the three authorized personnel had accessed the physical paperwork. The information had never been digitized, never spoken over the phone, and never broadcasted on any open channel prior to the incident. There was absolutely no logical way a random radio hijacker could have obtained the seal number Alpha 7942. But the third and most terrifying discovery came when Langford received the triangulation coordinates from the FCC telemetry data. Radio waves operate on basic physics. By measuring the signal strength from three different receiving towers, investigators can pinpoint exactly where a broadcast originated. Langford expected the coordinates to point to a house in a nearby town, or perhaps a mobile radio setup parked on the side of the highway. Instead, the coordinates pointed to a location deep within the interior of the Everglades. It was a spot entirely inaccessible by any road, boat, or foot traffic. It was miles away from the nearest power line or cell tower. When Langford cross-referenced the coordinates of the radio broadcast with the geological survey maps of the area, he realized something that made his blood run cold. The exact origin point of the broadcast, the place where the smooth, calm voice of the dispatcher was transmitting from, was located at the precise GPS coordinates of the deep water canal where Bill MacIntyre had nearly driven his truck. The exact spot where the rusted remains of Paul Evans's 1978 Kenworth lay rotting in the muck. The radio transmission had not come from a tower. It had come from beneath the water. The investigation was quietly closed by Apex Chemical Transport in December of 1994. They classified the incident as an unexplained radio anomaly and a weather-related near miss. The company rerouted all future hazardous material shipments away from Highway 27, opting for the longer, safer route down Interstate 75. William MacIntyre never drove a truck through the Everglades again. In fact, he turned in his keys a week after the incident, retiring after 25 years on the road. He moved to a small town in Georgia, far away from the ocean, the swamps, and the heavy humidity of the Florida peninsula. But the legend of the dead frequency lived on. To this day, if you walk into a late-night diner at a truck stop in South Florida and sit at the counter with the veteran haulers, you will hear whispers of the ghost dispatcher. You will hear warnings passed down to the new drivers heading out onto Highway 27. They will tell you to keep your radio locked tight to Channel 19. They will tell you that if the static ever drops out and the cab fills with a heavy, pressurized silence, you need to turn the radio off immediately. Because out there, in the pitch black of the sawgrass, where the cell service dies and the headlights barely cut through the fog, there is a voice waiting in the static. A voice that knows your name, knows your cargo, and wants nothing more than to guide you off the pavement, down a dead-end dirt road, and into the dark water of the interchange that doesn't exist. And that brings us to the end of another journey down the dark and lonely highways of the unknown. The terrifying events of November 14th, 1994, serve as a chilling reminder that sometimes the voices in the static aren't coming from a radio tower. They're coming from somewhere much, much darker. If you enjoyed tonight's ride, please do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to Channel 19 Mysteries, and leave a comment down below. Let me know, what would you have done if you were in Bill's shoes? Would you have backed that massive rig out of the swamp, or would the panic have set in? I am always looking for new stories from the road. If you have any creepy encounters, unexplained sightings, or terrifying tales of your own, I want to hear them. Send your stories over to mycreepyencounter@gmail.com, and you just might hear your experience featured in a future broadcast. Until next time, I'm your host, Midnight Rider. Keep your eyes on the road, trust your gut, and whatever you do, stay safe out there.